Good evening, and welcome to the New York Society Library. My name is Sarah Holliday, and I'm from the library's programming staff. As we begin, we acknowledge that the library stands on traditional lands of the Lenape people and other indigenous peoples to whom we pay respect. If you are new to the New York Society Library, we just celebrated our 270th anniversary last year. In addition to our large collection of books and other materials, beautiful reading spaces, including this one, our children's library, and other services, we offer a full season of events with authors and other presenters, so please take a look at what's coming up. And if I can ask you to silence your phone or anything that might disturb tonight's conversation, that would be great. We are honored to have with us tonight Tao Leigh Goffe and Joan Kee. Dr. Kee is the Judy and Michael Steinhardt Director of the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU. Her books include The Geometries of Afro-Asia, winner of the 2024 Robert Motherwell Book Award, Models of Integrity, Art and Law in Post-60s America, and Contemporary Korean Art, Dansukwa and the Urgency of Method, which numerous publications have credited for bringing international attention to Korean abstraction and to post-war Korean art generally. Tao Leigh Goffe is the founder and executive director of Dark Laboratory, an engine for collaboration, design, and the study of race and ecology through creative technology. She's associate professor of cultural history and literary theory at Hunter College, and also a fellow at the Harvard University Kennedy School in Racial Justice Studies. She's worked in the past at institutions including Princeton University, Cornell University, Leiden University, New York University, and Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Goffe's research is rooted in decolonial thought, literature, and theories of labor that center Black feminism's engagements with indigeneity and Asian diasporic racial formations. Dr. Goffe's new book, Dark Laboratory, on Columbus, the Caribbean, and the origins of the climate crisis, it was named a most anticipated book by Publishers Weekly and LitHub, and it's been called stunning, brilliant, and transformative by Imani Perry. The New York Times Book Review says, Goffe's ear is tuned to songs of resistance, to what it looks like to make life amid and after colonial subjugation. This book is noble and necessary. We have copies of Dark Laboratory for sale by our friends from the Corner Bookstore in the back of the room, so do purchase your copies after the event. I'm now glad to hand the floor over to our speakers and enjoy the presentation.
Great, thank you so much for coming, everyone. So Tao and I have actually known each other for quite some time. We actually met in Kingston, Jamaica. And so one of the questions that I always have been interested in, so one of the things that struck me about Dark Laboratory was that she rearranges the geography of what we think about as the world. So I was struck by how you think of New Orleans as the northernmost point of the Caribbean, and that for you, that Jamaica itself opens up onto a world that, in fact, transcends some of the political regions and divisions that we're more accustomed to. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how this book, in many ways, unfolded through and because of Jamaica.
Thank you for that question, Joan. Yeah, it's such an honor to be sitting here with you as part of the Dragon Baby book tour. So Dragon Baby is here, and I feel that he needs no introduction. But yeah, the book was born in the year of the dragon when we think about the lunar calendar. So it's just, yeah, been really special to have institutions such as the New York Society Library who welcome a new mother. And I also just want to say before I answer your question that we're just so honored to have the New York Society Library as a partner of the Dark Laboratory. It's an actual lab that is not very far from here at Hunter College. So we're at 68th and Lex on the 16th floor. And you all should come and visit if you're interested and want to stop by and say hi. I am on maternity leave, as you can see, but also excited to think about collaborations and to think about the fact that you're so close by as well, which we could talk more about later. But I feel that Kingston, Jamaica brought us together, and then look at how we are here in New York, blocks from each other. And yet there are so many boundaries or silos between people who should be collaborating. So this book really was about a kind of interdisciplinary ethos that I think we need in order to tackle the climate crisis. So for me, it felt necessary to rearrange this geography because for those of us who come from the Caribbean, the Intimacies of Four Continents, which is a text by Lisa Lowe, we live that every day. A place like New Orleans also lives that sensibility when we think about centuries of globalization, and yeah, just how it is that Asia lives in the Caribbean, Africa obviously lives in the Caribbean, not to mention the Amerindian and indigenous presence for thousands of years, but the Middle East also lives in the Caribbean. So I ended with words in Arabic because all of these different communities are part of the Caribbean. So it's what we understand as a kind of geography from a place like Jamaica. And I wanted to share that kind of philosophy with the world. And I mean, New York City understands this too, being so polyglot as it is. So yeah, the fact that you and I met at a Guggenheim Asian Art Council in Kingston is so fitting, not least of all because I'm Jamaican Chinese, but because you've written this incredible book since then, The Geometries of Afro-Asia, and our work is about the kind of political stakes of rearranging geographies beyond solidarity. So I would love to talk about that because I think we both kind of bristle at certain keywords like solidarity, but we're certainly excited to build coalitions that will be necessary for salvation from the climate crisis.
And that's a great answer for me because, part of what makes your book so compelling is not only the focus on living beings, but on thinking about the relationship between the human and non-human.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just hear a little bit from you about how you came to choose the subjects and your approaches, because you read the book and it's like a roller coaster. It's like every reference you can possibly imagine, and it's almost like a psychedelic trip in a way. That's but in a good way, in a very positive way. So I wanted to learn a little bit more about what drew you to certain examples. Everyone I know raves about the guano chapter, and we can talk about that in a short while. But how did you gravitate towards certain subjects and references?
I mean, I feel that they chose me. My characters chose me. I've always wanted to write a book, but I've always been patient about the fact that I felt my characters would choose me. And the mongoose chose me. The guano is a character when we think microbially about these bird droppings that in the 19th century, started these guano wars between different nations because they're such a precious fertilizer that actually became known as white gold. And the birds that left those droppings over millennia became characters that needed me to write the book and tell it through these different chapters where they are the storytellers. So yeah, non-human ecologies, plants, animals became ways to narrate the climate crisis. There are so many models from nature, from coral reefs that we could learn about regeneration, such that all hope is not lost. There's so much that we can learn from mongooses about collective action. So I was pretty amazed to learn that the reason that mongooses survive is because they actually all give birth under the full moon on the same night, such that they don't even know whose baby is whose, and they all take care of their young together. So I think there are a lot of lessons in nature that we're not always listening to, but that we ought to reorder the kind of casting of this climate crisis in order to ask the question, who do we expect to survive and who is that we of the climate crisis? And why shouldn't it include the trees that are here? They have witnessed so much, right? So So yeah, there's a lot that I wanted to reimagine and reorder in the book. So it is a roller coaster. I've joked that it is everything everywhere all at once. I have some issues with that film, which we could talk about, but I do like this methodology of a kind of trip. So I'm really honored that you called it psychedelic.
In the best way possible.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that it struck me is that in some ways that maybe we're not also ready for your book, because I kept thinking about in the 19th century that scientists would actively dismiss animal rights activists, saying that why should we care about the rights of a pig or a cow and a dog? But without that scholarship, we would not have things like institutional review board ethics. The animal rights activists really force the issue that if you're going to have a scientific experiment, you need to have ethical standards. And I feel that that's, in some ways, that's how I read your book, thinking about what kinds of methods should we think about devising in the future. And I wanted to hear about, what should we actually be doing, especially now in a time when the climate crisis is not only just happening, it is presaging human extinction. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we need to first, I guess, form a common vocabulary. So I begin the book with a note on terminology, working interdisciplinarily, as we both do. You'll notice that certain disciplines are using the same keywords, but with different definitions. So I feel like getting on the same page with a kind of common language could be really important. I feel there are many different methods and ways that we need to think about the silo between nature and art, between, I guess all of these different topics that are seen as different, and to really think about how we respect one another's research or not in the hard sciences, in the social sciences, and the humanities, because we need everyone to come together to tackle this question of ruin. It was pretty shocking, to on the week of the elections, the US presidential elections, to record the audiobook for this and to actually step outside and not be able to breathe because of the Palisade fires that were taking place. So the book cover has felt like a kind of prophecy or premonition, but it actually isn't, because this has happened before. It's happening on this kind of cycle. So I think that we need to take a step back and rethink these various extinction events, and think about the fact that, LA was on fire recently, with the Palisades being the source of what was ignited again. So how is it that we can feel across these different geographies? And in the last chapter, Effective Plate Tectonics, I offer a kind of method for us to be able to have that empathy, because it feels like our grief becomes so segregated. So I feel that there's a lot of work to be done, because our fate is shared, no matter race, class, gender, etc. We will all meet the same fate in terms of what that extinction could look like for our planet.
Is that part of the reason why you decided to title the book Dark Laboratory? I know you've been cycled through a lot of different titles.
Yeah, I mean, After Eden was the title for maybe 5 years as a working title, and you'll see that it is referenced throughout the book in different ways, because I wanted to sit with the Hebrew Bible and this idea that God, his first punishment of humans was a climate crisis. So I wanted to think about the moral stakes of what that meant, but we got scooped with the title by a professor emeritus who wrote a book on like the history of the world. So I think it's actually fitting that we then were able to name the book after my lab, because there's a lot of conceptual ground that I cover in terms of what the dark means, who is afraid of the dark. But really, I see the dark as a place of possibility. I know it's common for people to say, oh, we're in dark times, but I guess I don't see the dark as a negative thing. I think about dark rooms, I think about old Hollywood, I think about being a DJ and what comes alive.
Well, I'm an art historian. We always have these bags that say we're art historians. We do it in the dark. So we love the dark.
Oh, very good.
Yes, yes.
Right? But it's these connotations of darkness that I think have left us with, I don't know, a crisis of imagination. And I was inspired by Toni Morrison, who was my professor in 2008, to rethink these terms because of her book, Playing in the Dark from 1993, which really is about how the United States is a haunted house. So when we consider stolen land, stolen life, there are so many layers of haunting, and therefore the dark laboratory becomes a place of play, a place of possibility.
No, that's one of the best things I think that the book does, is to constantly remind us that, yes, we might live in a difficult or challenging age, and it might not be an optimistic one in the sense that the sort of platitude of everything will be okay, but it's a resounding kind of almost gospel for hope, that don't lose hope. It's maybe we don't know what the outcome will be, but to still work towards some kind of commons or some kind of coming together. I don't know if that was your intention, but that's.
It wasn't my intention from the outset. Like, I'm not just this like optimistic, happy-go-lucky person, but I think because I'm deeply pessimistic, on the other side of that is optimism, because we're still here, we keep going. So especially when we think about African American and Native American life, obviously these people have lived past so-called timelines of apocalypse, world-ending events, and we're still here. So yeah, to not be hopeful would be to discount that people are still going. So I feel that it's easy to say, oh, there's no hope right now, but in a way, the fact of us being here means that there is a blueprint for survival, and that survival is an art form. So I feel like it's not a choice to not have hope, and especially when it comes to the future, I think becoming a mother has helped to reorient a sense of that as well, and to reorient what it means to be a descendant, and not in a strictly biological sense, but yeah, this was something that came up when we had the launch with Natalie Diaz, the poet, and I think this idea of 7 generations from the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and ways of seeing the future is really significant, and that we should also think about extending kin to include the buds of marijuana, to include the coral reefs, to include all of these non-human ecologies in the sense of who is going to survive.
One question I had for you, and we talked a little bit about this at the beginning, is to what extent is this a way to rethink the genre of autobiography? Because this is completely infused with your travels. You're one of the most receptive in terms to different forms of sensory stimuli that I know, and that is very much tangible on every page. So I sort of wanted to, in some ways, also hear about how does it kind of push or tweak at the autobiography genre, which is sometimes criticized as being too much about me, too self-centered, and this is the opposite of that. So yeah.
Thanks for that question, because it's one that comes up for us as academics doing this work. This is a trade book, and it allowed me to spread my wings. So I'm very grateful to my editor, Thomas, for encouraging me to do that. And I've actually decided the next book is going to be a memoir. So I'm fully taking on the genre, but I have to admit that, in terms of the tenure track, in terms of being a professor, that genre is frowned upon as being self-absorbed. But I think that I was excited to have little pieces of my journey and my story throughout the book. So not to center myself, but to acknowledge that it's my experience. And one thing that I do when I give workshops is I encourage everyone to bring the oldest family photograph that they have from their album, and to work in groups and to imagine the ecologies, so the environments that surrounded their ancestors in that photo. And it becomes a nice kind of portal, the photograph, to have people think about the ecologies that we should be bound to protect and that have protected us. So I feel like it's a question for everyone and a way to place ourselves as protagonists within the so-called climate crisis. And I've been struck by the fact that there are people who are surprised that humans should be part of this narration of the climate crisis. That there are people at business schools and let's say oceanographers, like people I've encountered who were just surprised that you could put the human history within the climate crisis. So I think it's actually just really important that we do write climate autobiographies and that we actually think about the mountains, the rivers, the various ecologies that our ancestors knew. I'm also very invested in music as a DJ, so I think that it's really wonderful when we can attune ourselves to the ecological soundtracks, and even to think about what are the bird songs that no longer exist, that we'll never hear again, that our grandparents and great-great-grandparents had heard. So I think that it gives us another way to orient to what is taking place, such that it doesn't feel as inevitable, this sense of doom, but rather we can place ourselves in the story and take action.
Is that part of the reason why for you that research also includes acts of creation? Because, you know, when you're reading the book, and I know you do serious archival research, just like any, scrupulous professor, but you know, two things is that it really expands what serious humanistic research should include, and at the same time, that without some kind of embodied experience of making, that maybe it's just impossible to do, you know, rigorous research. So
yeah, I see research as a verb. And at first I did begin as a PhD student when I was at Yale, just, you know, going to the Caribbean to these sort of dusty archives and scanning pages from periodicals. That's still an important part of my research practice, but it was in the moments of stepping outside and listening to the birds and noticing what was going on, speaking to bird watchers who are Indigenous and Black, and kind of realizing there's another story here beyond just trying to preserve all of these precious documents. So yeah, that took place over 15 years of being in places like Antigua, Cuba, Jamaica, really just traversing the archipelago and making sure to always book some sort of excursion with a bird watcher. So it became clear to me that this was the book that I needed to write because of that sense of research as, yeah, being about wildlife as well.
what was the most challenging or surprising thing you learned during this? I know it's 15 years, so it's a long time, but is there a moment or episode that really kind of stands out for you even now?
I would say time became something that I learned to surrender to. I was born in the UK, grew up in the US, as well as in London partly, and I guess like we have a Western sense of time that when the bus says it's going to show up at this time, it will be here. In the Caribbean, you have to let go of these questions. And it really taught me to surrender in a way that I think we should all be questioning the construct of colonial time. So that was one of the major challenges, but one of the most important lessons was to just surrender to each island and the way that it works. And there were many lessons that came out of that. One of them was when I was actually in the year that we met in 2022, I was hiking with a Maroon chief, affectionately known as Colonel, Colonel Sterling of the Moortown Maroons. And
Could you explain what maroons are for, well, I've read the book cover to cover, but yes, for perhaps members in our audience who are not familiar with maroons.
yeah, it's good to give a sense of that history. So the Maroons in Jamaica have maintained their sovereignty for over 350 years. They are descended from those who were had escaped from the Spanish and then the English from the 1600s on an island like Jamaica, but you find Maroons across the Western Hemisphere, so from places like Virginia to Brazil. So wherever there were Black people who were enslaved, there were always people who were rebelling and in major and minor ways. So yeah, it's really incredible. I was so gracious to have the chance to meet with this colonel, and we were hiking on his property, so in Portland in Jamaica, and it was like a vertical incline. He's in his 70s and he was just running up and down this mountainside.
As one does, yes.
Yes. And the rest of us were just like out of breath, confused. I was wearing these hunter boots that probably still have the soil from that excursion. But I begin the first chapter with just holding on to Colonel's hand and being so nervous about where to step. And he just said, step from your heel to your toe. And it was probably just a throwaway statement for him, but he said, you cannot get lost out here. And immediately it just grounded me, this idea of the concept of being lost, because we're in the Jamaican wilderness. But yeah, to kind of take a step back and to think about what the fear was, it made me think about how the map has been such a colonial tool, how the map has been something that maybe has been sold by capitalism to be a solution to a problem that actually doesn't have to be a problem depending on how we orient ourselves. Because what would it mean to be lost? What would it mean when hiking to take the wrong step? So it just helped me to understand a kind of different philosophy, an African philosophy that has, been retained within this time capsule of Black sovereignty for over 3 centuries. So I guess I'm saying that I feel in those moments, I sensed my colonizedness and my anxiety about things like the bus not arriving on time or not knowing where to step or what to do. And there's definitely an English sense of propriety that I had to try to let go of.
So one of the things that was most helpful so the book is, again, extremely dense, but extremely rich. I actually found, so there's a Polynesian navigator named Tupaia who was active in the late 18th century, accompanied Captain Cook, and was able to navigate all around the South Pacific without the use of a compass. And because one of the reasons being is that the concept of due north simply doesn't exist. He would navigate using swells, the color of the water, how birds would flock, even the sound of the wind. So a very different way of navigation. And I found myself keep thinking of that way of navigation reading your book, because a lot of books, again, you can kind of see, global south, global north, but those are arbitrary cardinal directions. There's no scientific reason why north has to be at the top of a map. And you very beautifully, I think, point out that, we actually have to follow the current, follow the swell, follow even how temperatures change when you move from a deeper sea to, say, more shallow waters. And so this is one of the questions I had for you too, is that your research is very much also about navigating the complexity of family history, that it's not just your family history. You know, I have students who identify strongly with, say, when you go to Hong Kong and you meet your relatives, and that then opens up onto all kinds of other connections, and then you realize, yeah, we're all enmeshed or entangled in some way.
Yeah, I think enmeshed is the word. And it is a book about meeting long lost cousins, distant cousins, extended family in the Amazon rainforest, going bird watching, just things that I never could have imagined or expected. But I guess, again, when you look to the Caribbean and our family trees, it's normal for us that people would appear to be of different races. So I think that that is also part of what I'm taking to task in this book, is a kind of colonial taxonomy when it comes to race, which we would all understand as a kind of colonial sorting tool. So yeah, it was, I think, exciting to be able to have the table of contents be its own map through the book, and to have different guides through the book. So it's fascinating you mentioned this this person who was a guide to Captain Cook, because we know what his fate was.
Yes. And the funny thing is that Captain Cook and his shipmates just agonized over, how did this guy how was he able to navigate through all of these different islands when they themselves said, oh, you can't, we have the Mercator map and we don't know where they are. So
it was about their lostness, and Columbus was lost. He sailed south instead of what he was supposed to do. He died thinking that he was in Asia. So I've just been thinking about, on this book tour, what do we do with this concept of lostness? And what do we do with this Italian mistake, as I've been calling it, that we've been living the consequences of for centuries now? So to look from 1492 to the present and the far future, I think we need to grapple with what it means to be lost, and what it means to be the kind of person who doesn't ask for directions. And what it's led us to in terms of monocrop agriculture, the fact that Christopher Columbus brought sugarcane to the Caribbean in 1493. So that's where I trace this genesis of this logic of modern capitalism of depleting the soil by planting the same thing again and again and again. So yeah, the guides that help us, a lot of them are tour guides. One was in Tahiti, and I just loved his kind of refusal to us as American tourists. He just didn't want to know our names. He said it was not important to him. And, we have such a tipping culture here that you're used to people engaging with you and not knowing, what's the motivation for that. But he said that more important to him, or what would tell him more about us, is to answer two questions. The first being, what is the river that you were born the closest to? The second being, where is the river that you drink your water from every day? So yeah, those two questions have been profound ones that I knew the answer to the river I was born closest to, but didn't actually know the water source. So I feel that, if each of you can think of the answer to those questions, and if you know or don't know, it is a kind of sense of orientation that can make us perhaps think about who also has the same two answers. And what do we have in common with each other? How are we grateful for the water that keeps us alive every day, and whose ancestral homelands do we live on? What unceded territories? So yeah, I feel that it's an ongoing process of learning, and I'm just really grateful to these different guides who helped me to reorient a sense of philosophy.
Or maybe maybe not even so much guides as, neighbors. So the neighbor be occupying a strange place between its friend and stranger. And someone that can help you scale down, because you deal with very, very large questions, but in a way that really has its focus on these granular encounters. And I know that you have a lot of very interesting encounters throughout, your various travels. And I'm wondering if there's an encounter that you have not had, maybe, that you wish you had in the course of writing this book.
An encounter that I haven't had. Not so far. I feel like it's so dense and just full of all of these different, maybe the mongoose. That I saw one in Hawaii that was just darting away. So in a sense, it feels like an encounter, but maybe to more fully be able to see a mongoose would be exciting. However, I respect the fact that they've evaded captivity. So yesterday we had a really wonderful event at the CUNY Grad Center with Emily Ravito, and we were talking about mothering and the apocalypse. And it made me realize that in a way I did follow the itinerary of the mongoose, in that the mongoose went from island to island, beginning in India in 1872, and then was transplanted to Jamaica as a way to save the sugarcane industry, because a white plantation owner believed that the mongoose would eat the rats that were threatening the sugarcane, but the plan didn't work, and instead it becomes one of the most notorious examples of a quote-unquote an invasive species. So this led to the extinction of all of the ground nesting birds of Jamaica, and then a Hawaiian plantation owner read this journal article and decided to do the same based on this faulty science, and brings the mongoose to Hawaii. And I guess I feel that, being able to encounter the mongoose more fully, I'll keep following her from island to island to see where it is that she takes us.
Should we break for questions? I have other questions too, but.
Maybe in just a minute.
Okay, great. Because the question I had is, so you have a really just acute sense of the island and its potential. I keep thinking about, Brave New World at the end, where, the diversion, the person who doesn't fit into the perfect society is sent to an island. And one of the world controllers said, this is actually a reward because you'll meet the most interesting set of people in the world that don't fit anywhere. And I was wondering, that was it a deliberate choice to think about islands, or is the island itself a kind of method for you?
Yeah, I think the island is definitely a method. Definitely in Caribbean studies, and I've done a lot of collaboration with Small Acts, the journal. We've had these series of conferences where we've been thinking about the Caribbean as method. I'm thinking about how you, introduced me to Asia as method when we were in Jamaica. And I think that, to take geographies as a method is really exciting, because what I learned is that islands are like, they're either volcanic in that they've risen out of the sea, or they're coral reef islands. So they're born out of the accretion of biomatter over thousands of years. And there's just something really exciting about the aliveness of islands, not to mention people who live on islands. I think just have a different sensibility about what it means to live in the state of emergency and exception, but also to face that every day with a sense of humility. And I think hope is not even the word, but just to keep going, because we have to, they have to. In New York, we're here as part of an archipelago of more than 40 islands, and it's easy to forget that. But I was able to kind of remember that, thinking about growing up in Queens. And I just want to give a shout out to Desiree, who's here, because yeah, I feel that to live near where JFK is, to think about the water, the land, these different spaces of encounter that are almost off the map, tells us a lot about rising sea levels. We all feel it, right? We all witness it. And the subway, for instance, when it rains and how water pools, we know that the tides are rising. But for some reason, people don't really think of New York City as an island. So yeah, growing up in the UK as well, being an island, I think that British imperialism unfolded the dastardly way in which it did, because it is a small island in a small place that was hungry for more and kept taking
Also, the
it.
food was terrible.
Exactly. I mean, this is a book about the Spice Wars. This is a book about the motivation for good food in 1492 that led, Ferdinand and Isabella to send Columbus on this journey. So it's continuing to take me across the world. We just came from the Alps, and it was pretty amazing to, think about the mountain songs there. We were invited by Yale to talk about grand strategy and the Spice Wars. I'm just really thrilled that I get to bring this method of the island to different places, because I do feel that the continents have ruled for so long, but we might actually find the solution if we let the islands lead for a change.
I think on that note, we should open it up to questions.
Thank you. I have a microphone. Who'd like to ask a question?
Hello, I was thank you very, very much for the very original way of working for your methodology, and also for the way you answer these questions so clearly, without paper in front of you to remind you of the questions. That in itself very, very admirable. Now, I come from a different world in some respects. I am an academic, and my area is is economic history, where every data is important and tells a story. And I respect that. I'm a plumber historian. I go down to the sources. So at first I had a lot of trouble understanding what you were both talking about. I must admit, I did not read much about that, could not have the time. With academics who do not, neither of you ladies, because you're also, right? Yes, you're an academic and you are even more than an academic. You do an amazing amount of work and thought process. So I would like to ask you some questions which kept coming up, because you both know the book and know the work and know the obviously, but also you and how it is conceived, conceptualized. But until the last few minutes, or 10 minutes, I had problems understanding what it was about. Now I realize what you mean about the verbs. But for instance, when you talk about taxonomy, colonial taxonomy, would you I have a couple of other questions to explain that a bit. When you talk about key words used in different disciplines in order to collaborate, what do you mean by that? Because my experience has been a lot of academics like to throw out a Greek word for a perfectly good English word in order to appear, we know what we're talking about. And often it is vague or not necessary. So I'm not always, keywords can also confuse. And the last question, without being provocateur, don't you think the economy is an issue to take into consideration? Unless there was economic growth, the Europe would not have gone to explore the world. They were looking for trade, direct trade routes, right? And it was a race because money could have been made and was made more. So money is a big incentive. So kind of, if you wanted to.
Sure, yeah, I feel there's so much that's really rich, pun intended, within the question that we can unpack, and maybe we can begin with value and valuation. So I was recently, when I said I was in the Alps at a business school there, and it was great to be able to speak with business students about the invention of business school, to think about how it is a construct, it has a history that actually goes back to the plantation, back to the optimization science of financial engineering that, has a very sordid history when it comes to the extraction of people who are my ancestors that were enslaved. And it all comes back to this question of value and valuation. So this is a book that is very much about economic history and maybe even pulling apart what economics is as a social science. So it's really about taking to task empiricism. A lot of people have been saying that they enjoy the kind of epistemic questions, and I think that the book is about even peeling back what epistemology is. So the book is about pedagogy. To answer the question about keywords, I'm trained in cultural studies, and Raymond Williams' book on keywords provides an incredible map around these kinds of definitions, but Stuart Hall, the Black British cultural studies scholar, also gives us a wonderful model for collaborative work. So I studied with people who studied with him at Yale, Michael Denning and Hazel Carby, and I'm really grateful to them for giving a generous model of what research could look like. So I was part of a working group on globalization and culture, where my professor actually used the money for his endowed chair at Yale to have us define keywords together and to present at conferences together. So when he would be invited to give a talk, he would actually say, I know you want me to talk, but actually I'm going to bring my group of 10 students and we're all going to give a group presentation on these keywords. So there's a kind of methodology that keywords, has importance for me to do with, that really dates to a very Black British sense of what it means to do collaborative work. In one of the chapters on coral reefs, I talk about the word coloniality, because that is a big keyword for us in cultural studies and maybe post-colonial thought. Well, yeah, I'm about to explain. So coloniality is also used by scientists, by oceanographers, to describe the way that coral reefs form colonies together, because they're made up of polyps, so they work collectively. So this is one of the examples of an ecology that I think we can learn a lesson from, about collective action. They also reproduce asexually, sexually. They have a lot to teach us about regeneration. And I was thinking about how in cultural theory, we talk about coloniality in the sense of the kind of grand scale of colonialism, and yet people will be in the same university, like CUNY or NYU, and they don't even know that they're using these same terms to mean different things. So I just feel that it's one small example, but if we were to actually have true interdisciplinary conferences where we could talk about that, it would be incredible. I think that we need economics professors to be a part of that conversation. In the book, I talk about economic geology, which I was surprised to learn was a discipline. I also just recently learned about economic botany. And it's probably not a surprise that petrochemical companies are the ones that started these fields of inquiry, because it's a kind of PR for them, for more extraction. So I think when we consider money and more money in the economy for Europe, I guess I want to, in a meta way, step back to say, like, well, what is money? It's a construct, right? Currency is devised into this thing that has meaning. And to say that these were trade routes, I think we can even take a step back and call them what they were or are, which is extraction routes. They're roots of extractivist capitalism. So I think that, yeah, the book really is about this question of modern capitalism and the way in which it was not inevitable. There was a before, there will be an after, but we need to tackle this crisis of imagination in order to get to that place. So it is actually deeply about this question of economics and valuation, which is no stranger to Black people because we have been valued, in fact. So to say Black Lives Matter, we know that we matter because of what the auction block was, right? What it means to have been converted, as it were, into chattel. So the whole world still has to live with the consequences of what that has meant and the kind of original sin that took place. So I really am saying in the book that if we don't actually sit with these crimes, we can't move forward. Thank you for your question.
Great.
Professor Goffe, thank you so much for this talk this evening. This was really wonderful. My name is Melissa. I'm also a child of Empire, born in Empire. Was born in London to Jamaican and Afro-Cuban parents. I've also, from London, found myself to New York with my parents, migrated here back to an island, but also had a relationship with Jamaica continuously throughout my life. And I'm just curious, I haven't had a chance to read or get the book yet, but I will this evening. I'm just curious in your studies and throughout the book if you have found women and Indigenous women being a part of the process of preserving not just land and culture and language, but the process of regeneration and healing that contribute to not just collective care, but also help us understand how collective care is a part of collective action and restoring, regenerating, and healing our communities, and how, if you've come across that, and how you found that situated in your process and within the book.
Thank you for the question and for sharing a little bit of your autobiography, because I feel that there are so many more of us who have these layers. So that's why the book really is a love letter to and from islands. So to hear Cuba, Jamaica, London, New York together makes total sense to me and to others of us here. And though you haven't read the book, I feel like you already know what's in the chapters because, there's definitely a sensibility that I believe West African women have when it comes, again, to this question of economics. And I would love to explore this more in my next book. But there's a word that we have, speaking of keywords, in the Caribbean, which is higgler. Have you heard of this term? So I just feel like when I talk about the end of capitalism and the before of capitalism, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be generating capital. I think that we can and we have, and there are ways to think about markets and literally market women who probably have been our ancestors, and to think about just their innate sense of entrepreneurship, the way that they have dealt with scarcity. A higgler in Jamaican parlance is someone that is a market woman and has a kind of sensibility of working alone, but also in a kind of circuitry with other Black women who are selling their wares, who come from country to the city, to the markets to bring that produce. And a lot of my research has been about understanding the ways in which in West Africa, so countries that are today known as like Ghana and Nigeria, you see a similar even like comportment or way of a sense of autonomy and independence when it comes to being a business person. And I'm very curious to kind of learn more about these kind of microfinance techniques, forms, methods. So I have an article I published in 2020 that was looking into this on susu or partner and these loan rotation systems, because my grandmother, who migrated from Jamaica to London, was able to buy a house that today would be worth like £3 million. And this was at a time when white people would not sell to Black people. But through these loan rotation systems, based on West African ways of saving money, pooling money, she was able to buy this house as a single mother of 6 children. So that also is what gives me a sense of hope, because that's impossible, right? And yet through communal knowledge, through a different sense of economics, oftentimes led by women, we're actually able to see other models. So in the last chapter, I talk about decentralized models of finance and federation, and what to do in terms of banking, because Canadian banks are leaving the region. So there's a kind of colonial infrastructure that is abandoning the Caribbean, which is devastating. However, it does give us an opportunity to think about what we could remake in that place. So I've been able to learn from Afro-Dominican women about farming and agriculture and how to study the phases of the moon as to when to plant, and that knowledge is there. It's in the gardens that our grandmothers plant, from Brixton to Queens to, from Havana and on and on. So there's just so much knowledge that lives matrilineally. And again, that knowledge has been discredited because it is women who are the ones that are transmitting it and carrying it out. So I look forward to seeing what you think, and feel free to email me. You can find my email address through Hunter College if you wanted to talk more about the book.
Just one quick note is that, so that's actually an Afro-Asian thing, the loan rotation system. And speaking of one personal anecdote, because when you're talking about these decentralized systems, my father worked for the World Bank for 25 years. His field was Africa. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that the bank pressured him to do is to say, no, you should be getting Ghanaians to sign up for loans from large multinational banks, break up these loan rotation systems, because they're informal. They are not part of the formal economy. Now, the informal economy, the default rate is 0, because if you don't pay back a loan, these women, they know where you live.
Yeah.
They got access to sharp things that can do things to you. Now, when they moved to the large banking loan systems, the default rate shot up. So that's just one thing.
Exactly. And we need to do more research on this together, because it's really what binds our sense of Afro-Asia. Another key word that I've come across that economists and people in finance use is indenture. So my next book is called Black Capital Chinese Debt, and it looks at the history of racial indenture. And it was through my husband, who just arrived, that I learned this word indenture, because it's so common in his work. And yet there's a whole history of Asians in the Caribbean due to this labor institution, which takes place in the labor vacuum after the emancipation of Black people. So just another example of a key word that is being used so differently by people in different disciplines. But actually, if we were to understand the stakes of debt, if we were to understand how debt has been used as a tool to racialize, if we were to think about who is considered the unbanked, what is formal and informal when it comes to these different economies, then we could really pick apart the World Bank and the IMF and what they have done to these regions in terms of an impossible and unpayable debt.
Gentleman in the front row had a question.
I've got my second question. You said one term, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought you said that racism was a colonial construct. Is that correct?
Well, I said that race is a colonial sorting tool. Yeah.
Could you explain that a little bit?
Sure. And it actually comes back to the question here about taxonomy. So I guess I'm drawing from the articulations of Anne Stoller, who I think puts it very well. But obviously we know that race is a social construct, right? It doesn't exist. Scientists have disproven this idea. So to think about how race is socially constructed, we could look at the legal ways that it takes shape. We know that it is a social reality and that it divides our world, right? But it's interesting then when you pick apart when it was invented, in a sense, when it comes into play. But what we can certainly see is that from the plantation economy, it helped to sort a kind of hierarchy to help the plantation function. So I'm looking at the history of racial slavery and how creating a system of difference allowed the plantation to function. So being able to kind of pick apart what race is in that way, I think is very helpful in order to say, yes, of course, there are physical differences and people look different and from different parts of the world. But how is it that European colonialism devised this hierarchy based on a kind of Eurocentric idea of what was supposed to be better and what was worse? So to understand it in that sense, I think is very helpful to pick apart the kind of inequality that capitalism requires for profit.
I think that's very important, and I don't think we understand it very well. In Western civilizations, I don't think it's understood very well.
Right, it's kind of like an algorithm, which is also a sorting tool. So when I'm teaching, I try to kind of place it that way, that it helps this whole system if there is inequality. And I'm not saying that racism came from the transatlantic trade of enslaved Africans. Like there are deeper origins and histories into the medieval period to do with how Jewish people were treated. But it's a fascinating, I think, topic and genealogy that would tell us a lot about why we are where we are now in terms of anti-Semitism and, how to define race.
I think it's very related to economic inequality too, extremely related.
Exactly.
In New York City, there is an economic racism, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Different than just what we think of the regular racism between races.
Right, from zip code to zip code, and it's just it overlaps with environmental racism. And I think a really good definition comes from Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who I'm really lucky to have as a colleague at CUNY. She's a geographer, and she defines race as state-sanctioned, group differentiated. What is it fully that she says? But state-sanctioned, group differentiated exposure to premature death. So when we think about the fact that certain people are dying faster, that actually tells us more about what race is or isn't.
Thank you so much, Professor. That was really generous. I think also in the mode of your work, actually, in its scale, in how you tackle these large questions of the Caribbean as a paradise and what it takes to uphold that paradise. And also how you get into the details of what that actually looks like. I really enjoyed hearing you talk about the physicality of the islands as a way to inform your methodology. And I'm actually wondering how Rosedale Queens might have affected or influenced your research and the way that you approach the Caribbean as well, especially as we are talking about so many of these issues that are also existing in New York, right? And so I'd love to hear about that, of course, hailing from Rosedale Queens.
Thank you for that question. It's just, this is an incredible poet who has asked this question by her book, What Noise Against the Cane. I think that yeah, I'm so inspired by your writing and also the way in which you're approaching scale in terms of the Haitian Revolution, this kind of multi-sensorial approach to telling that story. And it also does end up in Rosedale, Queens, which we both hail from in different ways and on different timelines. And that even though we met only, I guess, like a few years ago, that we have been living these parallel kindred lives. Coming from a place like Rosedale, Queens, which is right near JFK Airport. So I wanted to sit with the fact that, you know, most people who are entering the US may come through JFK and they're looking down and have all these ideas about the bright lights and, you know, what New York City means, but they jump over this community. And there's so much to be said about how growing up there, right, we live with the sound of the airplanes, the kind of noise pollution. So to think about this, what you accurately said about these inequalities within New York City, I just began to kind of think about my own childhood in this majority Black, I guess, town. I don't know what we would call it necessarily, but to think about Queens as this incredibly diverse borough, but that there are these layers and silences that I didn't know about in terms of racism and the fact that there was a KKK chapter in the 1970s in Queens. And my parents didn't tell me about that. My mother grew up there from the 1970s and was from Crown Heights before that. But even if we weren't told about it, there's something strange in which what's withheld affects your relationship to the place. And yeah, there was just so much that came to bear in the chapter on bird watching, in which I actually talk about this colonial taxonomy of race and also bird watching. And yeah, it became kind of memoiristic in that I thought about my childhood and going to Catholic school, and that all the kids were Afro-Caribbean like us, but all the teachers were white and were either Italian American or Irish American. So it was clear there had been this exodus, this white flight. And then I began to learn that this was like actually the case study that social scientists draw their data from in terms of white flight, and that there are all of these books written on Rosedale, documentaries made by Bill Moyers, that there were, I guess, groups of white supremacists who bombed a house that Afro-Trinidadian folks were living in, threatened their children. And this is all in the 1970s. And it's just so recent that it just made me think, we're all living in very different New York cities. But as it happens, one of our professors in the Dark Lab, which is a collective, also comes from Rosedale, also comes from Trinidad, and another person is a curator at the Guggenheim, also from Rosedale, a professor at Columbia, also from Rosedale. So it's making me think, like, what is it about this place in Queens that has led us to these different jobs in higher education and in the arts, with this story underneath it, where in Southeast Queens, right, we're near this kind of swamp land. There's the smell of that. There's the mosquitoes. When you're outside playing as a kid, but you're warned about the sitting water. But it's the fate that's coming for all of the city, right? But we meet it first because we're Black and living at the edge, and white people have fled that space. So I really just wanted to use that chapter to think about, again, this kind of island territory and what it means for Caribbean people to constantly be surviving that and being inventive. And so thank you for being here, and thank you for your poetry, because it's so alive in ways that have really influenced me to write a book like this.
Could you say the name of the poetry and the poet again?
What Noise Against a Cane? It's called What Noise Against a Cane, and I'm Desiree C. Bailey.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.